given that we're pretty close to kind of the end of adding new things to Splatoon 3, they'd better be done adding new specials, for example. They'd better just be putting more kits out there with the same specials so that we have more chances to play the things we want to play. I thought I'd comment on kind of which of these I find to be good designs that I want to see back in a future installment. This is not to do with their viability. This is not to do with the problems they create in terms of balance. This is more just, are these likely to result in a weapon kit in this game or in a future game that is fun to play and, fun to play against at the same time? And so that's what this list is. This is, do I want to see these specials back? Are they well-designed specials? So we'll start at the bottom, actually, and then get up towards the top. Because I think it's easier to understand what makes the stuff at the top special when you see... special. When you see what makes the stuff at the bottom kind of not super functional. So... one thing that's weirdly just not on this list, this might just be like an older patch or something, but triple splashdown is not here. They've got a second thing for Tacticooler, so I don't know, maybe we're intended to like use this as a stand-in for triple splashdown. I don't know. Triple splashdown goes down here. So splashdown, I think has a fundamental design flaw that it is either not fun to play against because it just is too much of a get out of jail free card, or it's kind of useless because at a certain level people can just counterplay it, and since you're on such a defined path, they shoot you and you're down. I think the current triple splashdown is like the best compromise that they could come up with, where you have a little bit of a disjointed hitbox in that you can extend your explosions a little further away on a short delay, and maybe you can snipe someone with those, but you're still very likely to go down every time you go up and use it. I think I'd rather they just stop making these specials where it's just like, cause big explosion immediately around player one time and make them splatable as soon as they try to do this. So Reef Slider has exactly the same problem. It's just never actually been fun to have that in the game. It seems like a cool concept, and honestly, shooting down a splashdown was kind of a cool aspect of the special. The problem is it made the special useless to play with at a competitive level, and so I just don't want any more kits to be wasted on specials like that. If you're going to have it create a big explosion or something like that, either make it something like a Booyah Bomb where you're setting it up and targeting it further away, or make it so that it's more of a get your player out of jail free card. Like, this is probably a controversial opinion, I actually think that Splatoon 2 Baller was very well designed in this vein, that like, this is just for getting you out of a situation, and then you have a really telegraphed explosion that maybe you could use. Maybe it's a way to get someone off you, but it's not a way that's just going to be a total get out of jail free card, but something that like you could survive with and has some utility. I think that that's better than both the triple splashdown and the Reef Slider, and I'd like to see something more similar to that than to the other stuff that we got. Kraken, I really don't like because it's just invincible, and invincibility makes it so that it's not that the invincibility itself is a problem so much as the fact that balancing around the invincibility is really hard and makes it so that you end up with something that feels either pretty anemic or overpowered, and there's no in between. Kraken Cheese is a perfect example of why this isn't great, because the special itself can have some use cases in like really aggressive team comps for shepherding people into your teammates to get them splatted. But for the most part, what it's being used for right now in competitive play is power clam super jumps, which are just a little bit too strong for how easy they are to execute. I would rather this be something more similar to the Ultra Stamp, where it has some very clear strengths and some very clear weaknesses, and that creates a counterplay situation, instead of the counterplay being simply avoid the player who is using this special entirely. And if you cannot do that, then it is a 100-0 matchup in their favor. The one thing I do like the most about the Kraken is the aspect that it will end, and when it ends, it's going to have end lag, and so you need to spend some of the time you're in the Kraken ensuring that your transformation is going to be safe. But I think there are other specials that do that aspect significantly better, so I'd rather just not see it again. Big Bubbler, it's a cool concept in theory. Like, you think, oh, this might enable more aggressive weapons. This might block off areas that you don't want to be, able to be fired through. Basically like a larger scale splash wall. But in practice, what it ends up doing is just kind of giving you something to mindlessly aim and shoot at while you try to, stall an enemy push. Either that, or it's just, oh, well, there's a big bubbler up. Now we can't do anything. That situation where you're playing against it feels very unsatisfying. Like, it doesn't feel fun to just burn through, this DPS sponge of a barrier. And it's also not, like, super satisfying to use. It goes out and you're like, okay, I've got my bubble now. We're good. And it may have a very significant impact, but also you're just like, well, I've got my bubble for like 5 seconds and then it's going to get shredded, and now I'm back to just playing the game normally. I don't think it offers enough that's interesting. I think there are better ways to do a defensive special. Wavebreaker, I think, was a lot cooler on launch, and then people learned how to jump over the waves, and now it's just like, oh wait, this is just kind of weak now. It's not that good. When it had that initial impact and like it was like, oh shoot, I've got to jump over this really okay, I'm jumping now. The trade-off of like, wait, do I jump over this? Do I tank it? Like, that was really interesting from a theory crafting perspective. And then the way it played out, it was like, oh, everyone's just good at jumping over this now. And now it's not really doing much for anybody at all. We're going to need to buff this if it's going to work. So it was a cool concept, and I liked the idea. I think now that we see how it actually plays, probably just kind of go with another idea. Next is Tacticooler. Tacticooler, the problem is that you're trying to create a support special that's not overpowered, but also is worth running. And that's something that they've been struggling with. Like, they had Bubbler, they had Armor, they had Tacticooler, and like all of those specials, they either felt anemic or they felt way too strong. And it feels really difficult to hit the happy medium. I like the concept of there's a buff that you can go out and collect that a teammate can throw out there for you, but it needs to not involve your respawn time, I think, because the respawn time aspect is really kind of making the game frustrating to play. I think that they're like going into a solo queue match, it's really frustrating when the other team has cooler advantage and you get a really good KD ratio. You feel like I'm getting a lot of players down and I'm not going down myself. And I just feel like I can't move forward off of the advantages that I create because they don't last long enough. It changes the risk reward of the entire game. It like changes the rhythm of the game to such a degree that it's just frustrating. Instead of you either join and play a Tacticooler yourself, or you kind of just get left behind. And so now there's a slot on your team that's got to be dedicated to a Tacticooler player, and like nobody wants to be forced to play this one special just because it's too good. So I'm not a huge fan of it. Again, I like the idea of being able to give your teammates some kind of buff, but it can't be that buff. It needs to be reworked in some way. So that's maybe this puts it in a different tier or something like that, but here's where I decided to put it for that reason. Okay. So those are the ones where I'm like, I don't see a version of what this does that works. I don't see anything that like changes your respawn time that drastically being something that's healthy for the game. I don't think that this special's going to do enough unless you make it significantly stronger or something like that, or make the waves move faster, or something that has to scale with player skill, which is tough to do. The players have gotten better at playing against this, and therefore it doesn't work. So probably just not a thing that you're going to want to have in the game. So like all of these things have whatever it is that they fundamentally do. I just don't like being a part of a special. These next ones, what they do is fine, and they can definitely be fun under certain circumstances, but they're kind of just forgettable. It's just like, oh, they do damage here, and I have to move. Neat. The super chumps are a little bit more interactable in that you can shoot them down, but because they do so much less than the others do, it's just like, oh, cool, someone put their balloons over there, and if I just stand here for 4 seconds, then I get splatted, but otherwise, nothing of consequence is going to happen, unless something of consequence was already going to happen because I'm already in trouble, and literally anything else would have caused the same impact that this does. Missiles are annoying because they're not super interactable, and so you either have to buff them to the point where they're too strong, or they just end up in the state that they're in S3, which is a lot healthier for the game, but is also just kind of boring. It's like, okay, they have to move in a second, they've moved, cool, the special did its thing. It doesn't take an awful lot of tactical intelligence. You're just kind of trying to hit as many people as you can with it at once. In a competitive setting, you can call out, where the opposing players are, which is a cool aspect of it, and something that features that sort of vision element is nice. I'll say the same thing about the killer whale, but the overall impact of the ability is not super interesting to me. The killer whales, I think this like global straight line of sight goes through walls kind of damage dealing thing, probably just maybe best not to have in the game. This one is fine. It's probably the best version that you're going to get of it, in that it's not super strong and it actually really encourages you to use the squid roll mechanic, which I think is neat. But it doesn't feel like it does enough. And making it do more might become a balance issue because it's, not something that you have to aim. It's not something you have to guide. But when you let someone aim it or guide it, you end up with something like Stingray, which is too powerful. But also with Stingray, the fact that it was balanced around being difficult for the player to use meant that up until the point where it was too powerful, it also felt really wimpy and like it wasn't doing anything. I don't know. It doesn't seem like any iteration of that has really done a lot, and maybe we just kind of try to revamp it somehow. Tri-strikes, I think, are pretty forgettable in that they kind of do too much the same as the Booyah Bomb. I get the idea of, like, it's cool, the sense of, like, I'm planning an airstrike. And, like, looking down at the map on your Wii U gamepad and pressing on the map where you want that airstrike to fall. That is cool. And, like, seeing that place get, like, kind of nuked. Here, it just kind of feels like you're throwing 3 big suction bombs at someone. And that's about all that's really gonna happen as a result of it. And there's some cool things that happen with the geometry of those explosions that, you could apply to some other special, but I feel like there's not a lot there that makes me feel like I want to see specifically triple ink strike back. There's no kind of combo with them that feels super cool. There's no way of throwing them that feels super cool. It's just, again, it feels like 3 suction bombs. The next ones I think could be really fun if they just get a little bit of an adjustment. Zipcaster is really difficult, and a lot of people struggle with it, and I think that that's something that we want to adjust a little bit. I'd rather this be something that's a little bit easier to use and maybe even a little less powerful if it needs to be, but just something where when someone presses this special down, they feel like they actually have a pretty decent chance of being able to do something effective with it without just getting splatted immediately that doesn't require them putting thousands of hours into the game. Just like give someone a Spider-Man style grappling hook, make them hard to shoot, and maybe give them a little bit of armor, but make it move a little slower. I don't know. Find some compensation so that it doesn't feel like as much of a time crunch. There's a better way to be able to practice it and how to use it in combat than having to charge it and then use it and then charge it all the way up again. That's something that I think like a lot of the specials could really benefit from. Just like give us a level where we have them and we're free to use them. Let us pop them in recon and just keep them on indefinitely. Any of those kinds of ideas to give you more practice and let people use them would also be hugely beneficial to a special like this. Like maybe if you give a better tutorial area, like not a level that was designed with Zipcaster platforming in mind, but one of the actual maps that you have to play in the game, and give them a Zipcaster there and let them figure it out for an indefinite amount of time so that you can figure out what you're able to do with it and mess with it. And then maybe toggle that off so you can see how much time you have, but maybe have a way to give your special charge all the way back. Like some kind of practice tool I think would be great for it. Because I think at a top level right now, it's actually like a really cool special. It's really interesting. There are a lot of neat things that it does. And I'd like that to be accessible to more people is the main thing. Speaking of accessibility, Trizuka is dangerously close to that sort of Stingray problem where you either make it good enough that a top player is difficult to beat with it, or you make it weak enough that it's not worth choosing at all and nobody wants to use it. And I think this is actually pretty close to being just right. You want this to be like a skill shot weapon where it feels good to be able to hit it, and you have some ability to like hit around walls or arc over stuff, but it's not super punishing. I think there are also a couple of things with the design of it that need to get fixed. The way that it's aimed is very unintuitive. The fact that like it's going to fire at a parabola even if you don't aim it that way, that's different from how other Splatoon weapons fire. And that's confusing a lot of the time. Like, you'll aim it directly at a target, and the reticle will be intersecting with that target, and it will arc up over the top of it anyway. And that's just something that you have to get used to. That's not the way that it should be shown on screen to the player. And I think if they changed that, that would go a long way toward making it more accessible at beginner level. Another thing that I would like to see changed about it is instead of having the projectiles spiral around like they do, I'd rather them be consistent, like maybe just put 3 of them out, but kind of close to each other. That way you can still get that effect where even if one of them hits a wall, the other 2 will continue past it, and you can kind of use that to hit angles you otherwise wouldn't have access to. I think that's a really cool aspect of it, but it reduces the randomness. Sometimes those hitboxes just happen to spiral in a way that misses the player through no fault of your own. It's like, how are you supposed to calculate how many times it was going to spin around in the air before it got there? That's, I don't think, super realistic to ask of the player. So just like keep them so they're not spiraling around, but that they still have that effect, and I think that's really cool. And the last thing I'd probably do is just give it a slight decrease to the shot velocity. Right now, there's barely enough time to actually react to a Trizuka being popped. I think if you give it the same frame data generally, but make it so that the shot is a little bit slower, it gives people just a little bit more time to actually get out of there. And so it makes it a little bit more skill-based in that you have to be a little bit more predictive of where they're going to be, a little bit more unpredictable about where you're popping it. Just a little bit less of an easy win button across an open sight line would be nice. And up close, it would still have the same, impact because it's going to be a lot less reactable since you're right up next to them. So it incentivizes maybe getting a little bit closer, which increases the risk reward, and maybe there's some balanced stuff to go along with that. But I don't think you have to go very far from what the current Trizuka is to get to a great special. So that's why I just have it needs a tweak here. Inkvac is also like a super cool idea. And I just think literally the one thing that I want for Inkvac, honestly, is just make it more visually clear when you are in or outside the suction of the vac. Because it feels a little bit weird and arbitrary sometimes, like whether a shot is going to get sucked up or whether it's going to be outside. If you're going to change the hitbox, you've got to change the way that it looks on screen so that every player has this like crystal clear idea of this will get blocked, this will not. I don't feel like that's really there with this special right now, and that makes it feel either weak if you're trying to use it and you thought something would get blocked and it didn't, or way too strong when you think you have an open shot on someone and actually that shot just gets deflected elsewhere. So I think that would make it feel way better and be a lot more fun to play against and play with. These specials, I'm not like over the moon about or anything, but I think that they do a really solid job and they fill a niche in the game it's good to fill, and they're some of the best examples of filling that niche. Crab Tank is cool because it gives you the ability to control an area for a significant amount of time. And it has significant counterplay that's really cool. You can flank it, you can shred the armor, and it's not very mobile, so you can hit it with something that it can't run away from. Like, all of these are things that are great counterplay, super good design, I think. I think that, you could accomplish this in a number of different ways, but the way that they did it here is pretty fun. It's not quite as satisfying to use just because of how they've had to balance it. It doesn't feel quite as powerful as it used to. But that's all for the best just because of the way that you were able to, combo things with it. So I'm fine with it the way that it is. Inkstorm, I think, is a really fun early beginner support special because all you have to do is aim it in a direction and press a button and you get value. And that's really cool. And there's still a lot of, easy to use but difficult to master because you want to figure out what line you actually want to throw this thing on. Put it through a tight corridor, and now that's a lot more dangerous. Where do you want it to start? When do you want it to start? Do you want to throw it further away from you so that it's on the opponents right away? Or do you want it to take a few seconds to get there so that your team has time to get in position? There are a lot of complex thoughts to have about this very simple special. And it's not overpowered. You can get out of it, but it is also strong enough to be worth using. So I think it's really elegantly designed, and I like that there are some specials in the game that are challenging mechanically, and then there are specials like this, which are a pretty simple activation, and once you figure out how they work, then they just work. It is a little confusing at first, I think, just getting used to the fact that you have to both activate the special and then aim it, but I think that it's probably for the best so that you don't accidentally just throw it right away thinking, oh wait, I didn't realize I had to be aiming this before I pressed the button. So that's probably the best way for it to go, and it also gives it just a little bit of activation time to make it so that you can't just like use it in a panic if that were to be useful to you. Not that it probably would be, but Ultra Stamp, there was a time where I would have put this in fundamental design problem because I didn't have a lot of faith in a melee range special ever being either good enough to be useful or, weak enough to not feel overpowering. But I think they're closing in on that with the Ultra Stamp. I think that the way that it currently is powerful and deserves respect, but also has the counterplay that, like, you can only do this in very specific directions, and you've got to be tricky about when you're deciding to swing, how you're deciding to swing. There are a lot of, frame windows where you can get shot through. Certain weapon types can just kind of shoot you anyway, and that gives them extra value. So I still feel like it's a little bit on the weak side, but I think they're getting to a healthier place with it. And the fact that you can yeet the thing is also awesome, although I don't know. It would probably feel a little bit better if the projectile worked a little differently, but even so, very cool. But the best specials in the game, I think, in terms of design, are the Booyah Bomb and the Inkjet. So Booyah Bomb is, I think, the best example of a displacement special because it's something that the enemy team has tons of warning about, but that they still have to worry about, and that will still push them around, will still have an impact on the match. It still has use cases where it will absolutely splat someone because it can, get them trapped, but they have the time to not put themselves in those positions if they choose to trade off for instead putting themselves in a place that's safer. I actually kind of liked the version in Splatoon 2 a little better in the sense that it gave you the ability to see through it better, and you actually stood a chance of maybe firing into it and hitting someone or being able to see through it. It didn't smoke screen you the way that Splatter Color Screen does, which I'm realizing is not on this list either. So I kind of prefer that a little bit, but the idea that it lets you get all this armor that's a little bit difficult to shred and have this projectile you can use to defend yourself, unless, again, you've popped it in a really dangerous position and it's in the middle of the enemy team. It's not invincible, but it's strong enough that it can be used defensively. And I love the idea of you rising up into the air so that you can see around and figure out, where do I want to put this? This feels like what Ink Strike is trying to accomplish. Okay, where do I put this tactical nuke? This is where I put it. This is where it'll have the impact. There it is, go. And we're able to use it that way. That's how this feels to me. I know they're trying to channel, the spirit bomb idea, and that aspect of the aesthetic is very cool, but I think the way that it plays out tactically is very much that sort of Ink Strike idea. And so I think it's like the best of both of those ideas. Obviously, the reference to Dragon Ball is incredibly hype, and the fact that they used the Booyah as a mechanic to charge it is one of the really cool aspects of the game that I enjoy a lot. And I love that charging it up is something that the team has to do, and that the team also benefits from by getting special charge from doing it. Like, there's so much to say that's cool about this. It was just a stroke of brilliance that they came up with it. And I hope that it's in every edition of Splatoon. Inkjet is my favorite special personally. And part of that is because it's hard, but also rewarding if you play it well. Like, this, I think, has a better balance than the Zipcaster does, where that big bazooka shot that you get will obviously do a lot of damage if you just aim it in someone's general direction. Even if you're firing randomly, you'll sometimes just get a lucky direct and it'll feel real good. But if you learn how to hit those directs well, now you're really difficult to splat. And this is something that was used in top level S2 all the time. And it was a factor in top level S3 as well at one point. It's something that's, like, again, easy to use in the sense that, big explosion is a pretty powerful tool, but the difficult part of it is actually, where do you position it and how do you stay alive against players who are getting better and better at aiming and trying to take it down. And so that starts to change, the way that it has to be used. It makes it harder and harder to get that dopamine hit of getting those directs, but then when you hit them, it still feels as good as it ever did. Really, really fun special, and this is one of the high skill ceiling specials that I like to see. Like I said, I want a mix of high skill ceiling and low skill ceiling. I want there to be things that are accessible, but also things that you can work toward, things that you can be like, this is going to be hard at first, but it's going to be rewarding when I get it. And I like that Splatoon does have a mix of those, that you've got your Ink Storms, but you've also got your Zipcasters and Inkjets. That in Splatoon 2, you had Ink Armor. Just literally press in the right stick and you're helping. I think that that's a valuable thing to have in the game as long as it's balanced well at all levels of play. And I think that, like, Inkjet and Booyah Bomb have not needed to be touched that much in the game since they were introduced. The Inkjet needed a little bit of a buff to be able to be survivable, and it got that buff, and it also gave it a host of new things it could do, by the buff being that the pressing the B button boosts you higher in the air. That got you up over level geometry you couldn't get before. It got you to higher places that kept you safer, and that was a great addition that was basically all that this really needed. And, there have been some changes to Booyah Bomb armor and what can shred it and stuff like that, but ultimately, a few things needed to be tweaked. They've been tweaked, and these specials have not really needed to be touched that much since that time, and they've just been not only, a factor in the metagame pretty consistently throughout their lifespans, but they've never felt so overpowered and broken and annoying that we want them out of the game. And I think that's the sign of a good special. It's strong, but not too strong. It's fun to use. It has tons of counterplay and lots of interesting interactions and ways to work around it. But at the end of the day, it's simple enough to understand that you can just show it to someone and they get the general idea. So I think those are the gold standard to which the other specials should be held, and that the ones that are flawed in ways that prevent them from getting into that state in some way. So let me know what you guys think about it. Obviously, this is a very subjective, opinion-based thing, but I get asked about these kinds of things a lot. I get asked about the game's design and how I would design it, and I wanted to give my 2 cents, starting with the specials, and we'll probably do some other stuff later on with the subs and the main weapons, especially if this video does well. So don't forget to press the like button and to comment me the color of your favorite sweatshirt. That would boost the algorithm, probably, maybe, I don't know. Whatever people on social media say. Thanks for watching.